The man who built his dream alone. Before we begin, I would love to know where you're watching from. Tell me your country and city in the comments, because it's always inspiring to see people from all around the world come together through stories. If you enjoy powerful life journeys, inspiring true-to-life experiences, and meaningful lessons, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become a part of our growing community family. Your support motivates us to continue sharing stories that touch the heart. My name is Ethan, and there was a time when I believed that dreams belonged only to people who had money, connections, or someone willing to help them. I was wrong. Life taught me that the hardest dreams are often built with empty hands, sleepless nights, and a determination that refuses to give up. The story I'm about to share is the story of how I started with almost nothing except hope. I faced rejection, loneliness, failure, and moments when it seemed easier to quit than to keep going. Yet every obstacle became another brick in the foundation of the life I was trying to build. This is the story of how one ordinary man learned that sometimes the strongest person is the one who quietly keeps moving forward, even when no one is watching. I still remember the morning I decided to leave the small town where I had spent my entire life. The streets were quiet, and the first light of dawn stretched across the rooftops as if the world was waking up with me. I stood outside the tiny house I'd rented for years, carrying an old backpack filled with a few clothes, a notebook, and every dollar I had managed to save. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. People often think a dream begins with excitement. Mine began with fear. I had worked countless jobs since I was 18. I loaded trucks, cleaned warehouses, washed dishes in restaurants, painted fences, and worked late-night shifts at a factory. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Rent, food, and bills left very little behind, but I refused to stop saving. Every small amount I set aside reminded me that one day I would have the chance to build something of my own. Most people around me didn't understand why I kept talking about my dream. "What makes you think you'll succeed?" they asked. "People like us don't build businesses. You should be grateful you already have a steady job." At first, their words hurt. Then I realized they weren't trying to be cruel. They simply couldn't imagine a future different from the one they had always known. But I could. Every evening after work, I filled page after page in my notebook. I wrote ideas, plans, sketches, and goals. I studied successful people whenever I could, not because I wanted to become famous, but because I wanted to understand how ordinary people turned impossible ideas into reality. There were nights when exhaustion nearly defeated me. My hands ached from long hours of physical work, yet I forced myself to stay awake for another hour, learning something new. I knew I didn't have money to invest, so I decided I would invest in knowledge instead. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into his office. "I've noticed you've been distracted lately," he said. I admitted the truth. "I want to build something of my own." He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "I've heard that before." I waited for him to laugh. Instead, he said, "The difference between dreamers and builders is simple. Dreamers talk about tomorrow. Builders start today." Those words stayed with me. That evening, after finishing my shift, I walked through the center of town one last time. Every street corner held a memory, but my heart told me it was time to move forward. I wasn't leaving because I hated where I came from. I was leaving because I believed my future was waiting, somewhere beyond the familiar roads. As the bus carried me toward the city, I looked out the window and made myself one promise. No matter how difficult the journey became, I would never stop building the dream that had lived inside me for so many years. At that moment, I had no idea that the greatest challenges were still ahead, and that every sacrifice I was about to make would test not only my determination, but also the person I was becoming. The city was nothing like I had imagined. When I stepped off the bus, I was surrounded by towering buildings, endless traffic, and thousands of strangers who all seemed to know exactly where they were going. I stood there with my backpack over one shoulder and my notebook in my hand, feeling both excited and completely alone. I had booked the cheapest room I could find. It was a tiny apartment above an old repair shop. The walls were cracked, the furniture was worn, and the single window overlooked a noisy street that never seemed to sleep. It wasn't comfortable, but it was affordable. And at that stage of my life, that was all that mattered. The very next morning, I began searching for work. I visited construction sites, warehouses, restaurants, delivery companies, and small factories. Some employers told me they weren't hiring. Others promised to call but never did. After nearly 2 weeks of constant searching, my savings had become dangerously low. Finally, a small furniture workshop offered me a job. The owner, Mr. Bennett, was a skilled craftsman who had spent over 40 years building furniture by hand. The work was demanding. I spent long hours carrying heavy wood, sanding rough surfaces, cleaning machines, and organizing supplies. Although the pay wasn't impressive, I accepted the job without hesitation. Every evening after work, while most people rested or watched television, I opened my notebook once again. I continued writing ideas. I studied the local market. I observed what people needed and what businesses lacked. Whenever I walked through the city, I paid attention to the small details others ignored. I noticed which stores were always busy, which businesses struggled, and how successful owners treated their customers. Slowly, I began understanding something important. Success wasn't built in one giant step. It was built through hundreds of small decisions made every single day. One afternoon during lunch, Mr. Bennett noticed me reading business magazines instead of relaxing. "You never stop learning, do you?" he asked. I smiled. "I can't afford to stop." He laughed softly. "You remind me of myself when I was your age." That surprised me. "You built all this?" He nodded. "I started with one workbench in a rented garage." I looked around the busy workshop with new admiration. "It must have taken years." "It did." He paused before adding, "People only notice the finished building. They rarely see the years spent laying the foundation." His words became another lesson I carefully stored in my notebook. Over the following months, I worked harder than ever before. I accepted overtime whenever it was available. I avoided unnecessary spending. Instead of eating at restaurants, I cooked simple meals at home. Every extra dollar went into a small savings account labeled My Dream. Watching that account slowly grow gave me hope. It wasn't growing quickly, but it was growing honestly. Late one evening, after everyone else had gone home, I remained in the workshop finishing a task. Mr. Bennett walked over and placed an old wooden box on the table. "I've been watching you," he said. "You remind me that determination still exists." He opened the box. Inside were old business records, notebooks, and carefully folded sketches. "These were my first plans," he explained. "I made plenty of mistakes, but they taught me more than success ever could." He handed me one of the notebooks. "Take it." I hesitated. "I can't accept something so valuable." He smiled. "Knowledge only becomes valuable when it's shared." As I carefully held the worn notebook, I realized I wasn't just collecting ideas anymore. I was collecting wisdom from people who had already walked the difficult road I was only beginning. I had no way of knowing that the opportunity I had been preparing for was closer than I ever imagined, and that one unexpected conversation was about to change the direction of my entire life. A few weeks after Mr. Bennett gave me his old notebook, I found myself reading it every night before going to sleep. Each page was filled with handwritten notes, rough sketches, and lessons he had learned through years of trial and error. Some pages described successful projects, while others explained mistakes that had cost him both time and money. One sentence was underlined near the bottom of a page: "Never build a business just to earn a living. Build something that solves a real problem." I couldn't stop thinking about those words. The next morning, I began paying even closer attention to the people around me. During my lunch breaks, I walked through different neighborhoods, observing how small businesses operated. I watched customers enter and leave stores, listened to conversations, and noticed which services people appreciated the most. Slowly, an idea began taking shape. Many families in the city wanted high-quality handmade furniture, but they couldn't afford expensive custom designs. At the same time, many affordable products lacked durability and craftsmanship. I wondered if there was a way to offer both quality and reasonable prices. That question stayed with me for days. Instead of rushing into anything, I filled page after page in my notebook, calculating costs, sketching designs, and listing everything I would need to get started. Every evening after work, I researched materials, suppliers, and production methods. The more I learned, the more confident I became. One afternoon, Mr. Bennett noticed the new sketches in my notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked. I showed him my ideas. He studied each page carefully without saying a word. Finally, he looked up and smiled. "You've been thinking seriously." "I have." He pointed to one of the drawings. "This design is practical." Then he pointed to another. "This one is beautiful, but too expensive to produce." I nodded and made notes as he spoke. For the next hour, he shared suggestions based on decades of experience. He never told me exactly what to do. Instead, he asked questions that forced me to think more deeply. By the end of the conversation, my original plan had completely changed. It had become simpler, smarter, more realistic. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment staring at my savings account. Years of hard work had helped me save more money than I had ever owned before, but it still wasn't enough to comfortably start a business. For a moment, doubt returned. What if everyone else had been right? What if my dream was simply too big? I closed my eyes and remembered every difficult day that had brought me this far. I remembered the factory shifts, the warehouse work, the sleepless nights, and the promises I had made to myself. I realized something important. I had not sacrificed years of my life just to quit because I was afraid. The next morning, I made a decision. I would continue working at the workshop while preparing my business little by little. I didn't need to build everything overnight. I only needed to keep moving forward. When I shared my decision with Mr. Bennett, he smiled proudly. "That's how real builders think," he said. "They don't wait for perfect conditions. They prepare until opportunity meets readiness." His words filled me with renewed determination. Over the following months, every spare hour became part of my dream. I refined my designs, strengthened my plan, and saved every dollar I could. Then one quiet Friday afternoon, something completely unexpected happened. A customer walked into the workshop looking for a custom piece of furniture that none of our standard designs could provide. Mr. Bennett looked at me, smiled, and quietly said, "I think it's time you showed the world what you've been building in that notebook." At that moment, I realized the opportunity I had been waiting for was finally standing right in front of me. I looked at Mr. Bennett, certain that I had misunderstood him. "You want me to design it?" I asked. He nodded without hesitation. "I've watched you work for months. You've earned this chance." The customer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Collins, explained that he wanted a handcrafted dining table for his family's new home. He had visited several furniture stores, but couldn't find anything that matched his vision. He wanted something simple, durable, and built to last for generations. As he spoke, I opened my notebook. The design he described reminded me of a sketch I had drawn weeks earlier. I carefully showed him the page. His eyes lit up. "This is exactly what I had in mind." For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mr. Bennett smiled quietly from across the workshop. "I think you found your first client." Excitement rushed through me, but it was quickly followed by fear. What if I made a mistake? What if the finished table didn't meet his expectations? Mr. Bennett seemed to read my thoughts. "Every craftsman remembers the first piece they build," he said. "Not because it was perfect, but because it taught them confidence." I accepted the project. For the next several days, I worked harder than ever before. After finishing my regular responsibilities at the workshop, I stayed late into the evening, shaping every piece of wood with patience and care. I measured everything twice. I sanded every surface until it felt perfectly smooth. I inspected every joint again and again, refusing to rush any part of the process. There were moments when frustration crept in. One afternoon, I accidentally damaged a section of the tabletop after hours of work. I stared at it in disappointment. For a brief moment, I considered trying to hide the mistake. Instead, I took a deep breath, started over, and rebuilt that entire section from the beginning. It cost me extra time, but it protected something much more valuable, my integrity. Nearly 2 weeks later, the table was finally complete. Sunlight reflected beautifully across the polished wood, revealing natural patterns that made every piece unique. I stepped back and admired it in silence. It wasn't just a table. It was proof that years of preparation had finally become something real. When Mr. Collins arrived, he slowly walked around the table, running his hand across its smooth surface. He didn't speak immediately. The silence made me nervous. Then he looked at me with a broad smile. "This is better than I imagined." Relief washed over me. He thanked me warmly before arranging for the table to be delivered to his home. Just before leaving, he handed me a business card. "I have several friends building new homes," he said. "I'll be telling them about your work." Those simple words meant more to me than the payment itself. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began happening. One recommendation led to another, then another. People started asking specifically for the young craftsman who designed custom furniture with care and attention to detail. I still worked full-time for Mr. Bennett, but my evenings and weekends became busier than ever. My notebook, once filled only with ideas, was now filled with customer names, measurements, and new designs waiting to be built. One evening, after closing the workshop, Mr. Bennett invited me into his office. He placed a small set of keys on the desk between us. "What are these?" I asked. He smiled. "The storage building behind the workshop has been empty for years." I looked at him with surprise. "I want you to use it." I was speechless. "You need a place to build your own dream," he continued. "And I believe you've reached the point where it's time to stop borrowing your future from someone else's workshop." As I picked up the keys, I realized they opened far more than an old building. They opened the door to the life I had been working toward for so many years. That night, standing inside the empty space for the very first time, I could already imagine the sound of tools, the smell of fresh wood, and the future taking shape one piece at a time. The next morning, I unlocked the door to the old storage building for the first time. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, revealing empty shelves, worn wooden floors, and years of forgotten clutter. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, and the air smelled of old timber and rusted tools. Most people would have seen an abandoned building. I saw the beginning of my future. I spent the entire weekend cleaning every corner. I swept away years of dust, repaired broken shelves, replaced cracked window panes, and painted the walls with a fresh coat of white. It wasn't perfect, but every improvement made the space feel more alive. When I finished, I stood in the center of the room and smiled. It was the first place I could truly call my own. I still worked full-time at Mr. Bennett's workshop during the day. After work, I crossed the yard, unlocked my little workshop, and continued building custom furniture late into the night. There were evenings when I didn't leave until after midnight. Some nights I was so tired that I almost fell asleep while sketching new designs. But every morning I woke up with the same determination. My first few customers were patient and encouraging. They appreciated that I listened carefully before beginning each project. I wasn't trying to build as many pieces as possible. I wanted every piece to tell its own story. One customer asked for a bookshelf to hold books that had belonged to her late grandfather. Another wanted a rocking chair for his parents' anniversary. A young couple requested a dining table where they hoped their future children would one day gather for family dinners. As I worked on each project, I realized I wasn't simply building furniture. I was building memories that would become part of other people's lives. That thought made every hour worthwhile. Several months passed. The orders continued growing. Soon, my evenings and weekends were completely booked. For the first time since leaving my hometown, I faced a different kind of challenge. There wasn't enough time to do everything alone. I tried working longer hours. I slept less. I skipped days off. At first, I convinced myself I could handle it. Then one afternoon, while lifting a heavy wooden board, I lost my balance from exhaustion. The board slipped from my hands and crashed onto the floor. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Mr. Bennett hurried over. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "When was your last full day of rest?" "I couldn't remember," he sighed. "You've worked too hard for too long." "I can't slow down," I replied. "If I turn customers away, they may never come back." He smiled kindly. "Building a dream isn't about working until you collapse. It's about creating something that lasts." His words stayed with me. That evening, I sat alone in my workshop thinking about everything he had said. I looked around the room. The machines, the tools, the unfinished projects, the growing list of customer orders. I finally admitted something to myself. If I wanted this dream to continue growing, I could no longer do everything by myself. The next morning, I wrote a simple notice and placed it in the front window. "Apprentice wanted. Looking for someone willing to learn, work honestly, and build with pride." Experience is welcome, but determination matters more. I wasn't searching for the most experienced craftsman. I was searching for someone who reminded me of the young man I had once been. Late that afternoon, just as I was preparing to close the workshop, the front door opened. A nervous young man stepped inside carrying an old backpack. He looked around the room before quietly saying, "I saw your notice, and I was hoping you might give someone like me a chance." As I looked into his uncertain eyes, I saw my own reflection from years earlier, standing at the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The young man stood quietly near the doorway, holding the straps of his worn backpack, as though he wasn't sure whether he should stay or leave. He looked nervous, but there was determination in his eyes that reminded me of myself years earlier. "What's your name?" I asked. "Liam," he replied. "Have you worked with wood before?" He smiled awkwardly. "Not professionally. My father taught me a few basics when I was younger, but I've never had anyone willing to train me." I nodded. "Why do you want this job?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the workshop before speaking. "Because I don't just want a paycheck. I want to build something I'm proud of." His answer caught my attention. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was honest. I offered him a chance to spend the day with me. Rather than testing his skills, I watched his attitude. Whenever I handed him a task, he listened carefully. When he made a mistake, he admitted it instead of making excuses. Whenever he finished one job, he immediately asked what needed to be done next. By the end of the afternoon, I had made my decision. "You start on Monday," I said. His face lit up with a smile. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know," I replied. During the first few weeks, I taught Liam everything Mr. Bennett had once taught me. How to measure carefully, how to respect every piece of wood, how to slow down instead of rushing. Most importantly, I taught him that customers were trusting us with more than furniture. They were trusting us with pieces that would become part of their families' lives. He learned quickly. Soon I noticed something unexpected. With Liam helping in the workshop, I finally had time to focus on improving the business itself. I organized customer records, refined our designs, and planned for future growth instead of spending every minute completing orders. One afternoon, Mr. Bennett visited the workshop. He quietly watched Liam sanding a tabletop while I reviewed several new sketches. He smiled. "You've become a teacher." I laughed. "I still feel like a student." He nodded. "The best teachers never stop learning." As the months passed, our reputation continued growing. Customers recommended us to friends, neighbors, and relatives. Some traveled from nearby towns after hearing about our handcrafted furniture. Every completed project brought another opportunity. Then something happened that neither Liam nor I expected. One morning, a local business owner walked into the workshop carrying a folder. "I've heard good things about your work," she said. "Our company is opening a new office, and we're looking for someone to build all of our custom furniture." I looked through the folder. The project was far larger than anything we had ever completed. It included desks, conference tables, bookshelves, reception counters, and storage cabinets. Finishing it would take months. For a moment, I wondered if we should decline. The responsibility felt enormous. After the customer left, Liam looked at me. "Can we really do this?" I stared at the sketches spread across my workbench. Years ago, I would have immediately doubted myself. Now I remembered every lesson my journey had taught me. Dreams don't grow because fear disappears. They grow because we keep moving despite it. I smiled. "We're going to do our best." Liam grinned. "Then let's get started." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the quiet workshop. The once empty storage building was now filled with the sound of progress. Every tool had its place. Every workbench carried signs of honest labor. Every corner reminded me how far I had come. I gently ran my hand across the first dining table I had ever built. It was still there, still strong, still reminding me that every great dream begins with a single opportunity and the courage to say yes. As I turned off the lights and locked the workshop, I had no idea that the project we had just accepted would become the biggest challenge of my career, and the one that would test everything. I believed about leadership, perseverance, and building a dream that could stand the test of time. The following Monday, our workshop felt different. The large office project had officially begun, and every corner of the building was filled with activity. Sheets of wood were stacked neatly against the walls. Sketches covered the workbench, and a detailed schedule hung beside the entrance. For the first time since starting my business, I wasn't simply completing one piece of furniture. I was building an entire vision. Liam arrived before sunrise every morning, eager to begin. His enthusiasm reminded me that dreams become stronger when they're shared with people who believe in them. We divided the project into small steps. One week was dedicated to cutting and preparing materials. The next focused on assembling desks and cabinets. After that came sanding, finishing, polishing, and final inspections. Instead of rushing toward the finish line, we concentrated on completing each stage with patience. One evening, as we were finishing the first conference table, Liam looked at me. "Do you ever think about how different your life could have been if you had given up?" I smiled quietly. "More often than you think." "What kept you going?" I looked around the workshop before answering. "I stopped asking whether I would succeed. I started asking whether I would regret quitting." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand." Days turned into weeks. The workshop remained busy from early morning until late at night. Friends from neighboring businesses occasionally stopped by with encouraging words or a warm meal. Their kindness reminded me that although the title of my story was "The Man Who Built His Dream Alone," the truth was more meaningful. The dream had started alone, but along the way, generous people had offered advice, encouragement, opportunities, and friendship. Mr. Bennett had shared his knowledge. Customers had trusted my work. Liam had become a dependable teammate. Every person had added another brick to the foundation of my journey. One afternoon, we faced our biggest setback. A shipment of high-quality wood that we had been expecting for several days finally arrived. As we carefully inspected the boards, I immediately noticed a serious problem. Many of them had been damaged during transportation. Several pieces were cracked, others had warped from moisture. They couldn't be used for furniture that was meant to last for decades. Liam looked worried. "What do we do now?" For a moment I felt the old fear returning. The delivery deadline was getting closer. Replacing the materials would take time. Missing the deadline could damage the reputation I had spent years building. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. Then I remembered something Mr. Bennett had once told me. "Your reputation is built one decision at a time." I opened my eyes. "We're not using damaged materials, but we'll lose valuable time. Then we'll work harder." Without hesitation, I contacted the supplier, explained the situation respectfully, and requested replacement materials. Fortunately, they accepted responsibility and promised to send a new shipment as quickly as possible. While we waited, Liam and I focused on completing every task that didn't require the missing wood. Instead of wasting time worrying, we kept moving forward. 3 days later, the replacement shipment arrived. This time, every board met the quality we expected. We immediately returned to work with renewed energy. As the final week approached, the office furniture slowly filled the workshop. Rows of polished desks reflected the afternoon sunlight. Bookshelves stood proudly against the walls. Conference tables waited to be delivered. Walking through the workshop felt almost unbelievable. What had once been an empty storage building had become a place where ideas turned into reality. Then, late one evening, just as we finished wrapping the final piece for delivery, my phone rang. The caller was the owner of the company. Her voice sounded calm but serious. "There has been an unexpected change," she said. "I need to speak with you before tomorrow's delivery." The way she said those words made my heart sink. I had no idea whether everything we had worked for was about to become our greatest success or our biggest disappointment. I stared at my phone for several seconds after the call ended. Liam looked at me with concern. "What happened?" I took a deep breath. "The client wants to meet before tomorrow's delivery." His smile faded. "Do you think something is wrong?" "I don't know." That night, neither of us spoke very much. We walked through the workshop one final time, inspecting every desk, every cabinet, every bookshelf, and every conference table. We checked each measurement, tightened every screw, polished every surface, and cleaned away even the smallest trace of dust. When we finally locked the workshop, I couldn't sleep. Questions filled my mind. Had we overlooked something? Had the client changed the design? Would the project be cancelled after months of work? By sunrise, I had accepted one simple truth. Whatever happened, I would face it honestly. The next morning, Liam and I loaded the furniture onto the delivery truck. Everything was carefully protected with blankets and secure straps. As we drove toward the company's new office, I silently reminded myself that worrying would not change the outcome. When we arrived, the owner greeted us with a warm smile. That immediately eased some of my fears. "Thank you for coming early," she said. "I wanted to speak with you before the installation." I nodded. "Of course." She invited us inside the nearly completed office building. Workers were putting the finishing touches on the walls and lighting while painters completed the last details. She led us into the main conference room. "I've reviewed every piece your team built," she said. I waited quietly. "They're exceptional." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. She continued smiling. The craftsmanship, the attention to detail, and the quality exceeded our expectations. Relief rushed through me. "But," she continued, "there's something I'd like to ask." My heart skipped again. "We've recently purchased another office building in the neighboring city." She paused before asking, "Would you be interested in furnishing that building as well?" Liam looked at me with wide eyes. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Instead of losing our biggest project, we had just been offered an even larger opportunity. I thanked her sincerely. It would be an honor. Over the next several hours, our team carefully installed every piece of furniture. As each room came together, employees stopped to admire the finished work. Many asked for business cards. Others complimented the craftsmanship. Watching people appreciate something we had built with our own hands filled me with quiet pride. Before leaving, the company owner handed me a framed photograph. It showed the completed conference room with our handcrafted table at its center. "I thought you'd like to keep this," she said. "It's the first room visitors will see when they enter our headquarters." I accepted it with gratitude. Back at the workshop that evening, I hung the photograph on the wall near the entrance. It wasn't there to remind me of success. It was there to remind me of the journey, the sleepless nights, the long work days, the failures, the doubts. Every challenge had led to this moment. As Liam looked at the photograph, he smiled. "Do you think this is what success feels like?" I thought carefully before answering. "No." He looked surprised. "I think success is waking up every morning excited to build something meaningful." He nodded slowly. "I hope we never lose that feeling." "So do I." As the weeks passed, new customers continued arriving, and the workshop became busier than ever. We added better equipment, improved our workspace, and began planning for the future. Yet I also realized something important. The dream I had spent years building was no longer just about me. People depended on it now. Customers trusted us. Liam relied on the workshop for his future. Our growing reputation carried responsibilities far greater than profits. Standing in the doorway as the sun set behind the workshop, I knew we were entering a completely new chapter. The dream had been built. Now came the even greater challenge, making sure it would continue standing. Long after the excitement of success had faded, as the months passed, the workshop became busier than I'd ever imagined. New orders arrived almost every week. Some customers wanted custom dining tables, while others requested office furniture, bookshelves, or handcrafted cabinets. Every completed project brought another recommendation, and before long, our schedule was filled several months in advance. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but behind the scenes, I faced a challenge I had never experienced before. Growth. Success had arrived faster than I expected, and I realized that if I wasn't careful, it could become just as dangerous as failure. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my office looking at stacks of customer orders. There were more requests than Liam and I could complete on our own. I had two choices: continue saying yes to every customer and risk lowering the quality of our work, or slow our growth and protect the reputation we had worked so hard to earn. It wasn't an easy decision. The next morning I called Liam into the office. "We need to talk." He noticed the papers covering my desk. "Is something wrong?" "No," I replied. "Something is changing." I explained the situation. "If we keep accepting every order, we'll eventually disappoint people." He nodded. So what do we do? I smiled. We grow carefully. Instead of expanding too quickly, we decided to hire 2 more apprentices and train them. The same way Mr. Bennett had trained me. We weren't simply looking for skilled workers. We were looking for honest people who cared about doing things the right way. After several interviews, we welcomed Emma and Noah to the workshop. Both were eager to learn. On their first day, I gathered everyone together. There are only 3 rules in this workshop, I said. Respect your work, respect your customers, and never sacrifice quality just to finish faster. Everyone agreed. The following weeks were filled with teaching. Liam showed the new apprentices how to prepare materials correctly. I taught them how to understand what customers truly wanted before beginning any project. Sometimes mistakes happened. Measurements were incorrect. Pieces had to be rebuilt. Plans changed unexpectedly. Whenever that happened, I reminded everyone of the lesson Mr. Bennett had once taught me. Mistakes are part of learning. Repeating the same mistake without learning from it is the real problem. Little by little, the team became stronger. The workshop that had once belonged to one determined dreamer was now filled with people working toward the same purpose. One afternoon, Mr. Bennett visited again. He slowly walked through the building, smiling as he watched everyone working together. Finally, he stopped beside me. "You've built more than a business." I looked around. "I have?" He nodded. "You've built a place where people believe in themselves." His words meant more than any award or financial success ever could. Before leaving, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was the original key to the old storage building.
"I kept this as a reminder," he said.
"But it belongs to you now." I looked at the worn brass key resting in my hand. Years earlier, it had opened an empty building. Now it represented every sacrifice, every lesson, every failure, and every victory along the way. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I locked the workshop and stood outside watching the sunset. The sign above the entrance caught the last rays of light. I smiled quietly. The man who had once arrived in the city with nothing but an old backpack and a notebook had finally built the dream he had carried for so many years. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my journey. It was the beginning of something even more important. The final chapters of my story would no longer be about building furniture. They would be about building people, passing on hope, and leaving behind a legacy that would continue long after I was gone. After that evening, I stopped measuring my progress by the number of orders we received or the size of our workshop. Instead, I began paying attention to something far more meaningful, the people growing alongside the dream. Emma and Noah learned quickly. Just as Liam had once done, they asked questions, stayed late to practice new techniques, and treated every project with care. Watching them improve reminded me of my own first days in the city, when every lesson felt like another step toward a future I could only imagine. One afternoon, Emma accidentally damaged the edge of a custom bookshelf that was nearly finished. She looked at me with disappointment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'll understand if you take me off this project." I walked over and examined the damage. Then I smiled. "Do you know how many mistakes I made while learning?" She shook her head. "I lost count years ago." She looked surprised. "The difference isn't that experienced people never make mistakes," I continued. "The difference is that they learn from them and refuse to repeat them." Together we rebuilt the damaged section. When the bookshelf was finally delivered, the customer admired every detail, without ever knowing how much effort had gone into making it perfect. That day, Emma learned an important lesson. Perfection isn't about never making mistakes. It's about caring enough to correct them. As the months passed, our workshop became known not only for quality furniture, but also for honesty. If a project required more time, we explained why. If something wasn't right, we fixed it before the customer ever had to ask. That simple approach earned something money couldn't buy: trust. Soon, local schools invited me to speak with students about work, perseverance, and building a meaningful career. At first, I was nervous. I had never considered myself a public speaker. During my first visit, a student stood up and asked, "Were you ever afraid your dream wouldn't come true?" I smiled because the answer was easy. "Almost every day." The room became completely silent. I wasn't fearless, I continued. I simply refused to let fear make my decisions. After the talk, several students stayed behind to ask more questions. Some wanted to become builders. Others dreamed of opening businesses, while a few simply wanted encouragement to believe in themselves. As I listened to them, I realized something unexpected. Years earlier, I had believed I was building furniture. In reality, I had been building hope, first for myself and now for others. One evening, our entire workshop gathered outside after finishing another successful project. We shared a simple meal, laughed about old memories, and talked about future plans. Mr. Bennett joined us as well. Looking around the table, he smiled proudly. I've watched this place grow from an empty storage building into something truly special. He turned toward me. Are you proud of what you've built? I looked at Liam, Emma, Noah, and Mr. Bennett before answering. I'm proud of the people we've become while building it. Everyone smiled. As the evening grew darker, I realized my dream had already become larger than I had ever imagined. It was no longer mine alone. It belonged to every person who had believed in it, contributed to it, and helped it grow. Yet I also knew one final chapter still remained. There was one last decision waiting for me, one that would determine whether this dream would end with my own story or continue inspiring others long after my journey was complete. Success wasn't measured by money, awards, or recognition. It was measured by the lives we positively touched, the opportunities we created, and the values we chose to pass on. If someone were to ask me today how one ordinary man managed to build his dream, my answer would be simple. I believed in it when no one else could see it. I kept moving when progress was slow. I learned from every setback instead of allowing it to defeat me. And I never forgot that the greatest achievements are built one honest step at a time. That is the story of how I built my dream. Not because the road was easy, not because I never failed, but because I chose to keep going, even when the destination seemed impossibly far away. And if my journey has taught me anything, it is this. A dream doesn't become real in a single moment. It becomes real every time you choose courage over fear, patience over shortcuts, and hope over doubt. That choice, repeated day after day, is what truly builds a dream, the end.